Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Show we take a look at every classic Doctor Who story plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. You should know the drill by now. It's the 28th of September 2019, and I just finished listening to part 1 of The Movellan Grave by Andrew Smith. Okay, so, Andrew Smith seems to be the go-to writer when it comes to taking villains from the classic series and trying to revamp them into decent creations. Because he did this. This is the second time he's done it. If he does it a third time with like something like, I don't know, the band drills or something, we can put this down, because this is the second time he's done it. The first time was in an early adventure, Domain of the Void, which I did not cover in the marathon, when I probably should have. Though I might cover it at a future date in a different project, because it's always a fun thing to talk about. And in the Movellan Grave, he's trying to do what he did for the Void with the Movellans. To perhaps not the same level of success, but I would say it's at least a decent success. The Movellan Grave is a story that's mostly set on Earth. At least this first episode is. In the 1980s. It's nice. It's, oddly enough, it's a contemporary set Doctor Who story, which is something that, at this time of the show, feels weird with this pairing. It just doesn't feel like something that the Doctor and Romana would do, mainly because of how, the Doctor and Romana are both Time Lords, so you really, with them, you really just got a bunch of stories that were set in the future, rarely, if ever, going to the past. So being set in the then present is just, like, the only one I can think of is City of Death. So this is just, as a type of story, the Movellan Grave feels very, very odd. And that's not a bad thing. Actually, it is just, it feels like we're returning to a different era of Doctor Who, and an era that, it's like we're having a glimpse into just telling a different story. It sort of spices up, I guess, sort of the monotony of a bunch of the future, set in the future stories that the show had been doing up to this point. And what's interesting is that you have, and it's, well, we don't bring in UNIT, we do bring in some archaeologists who basically find a Movellan power pack and accidentally reactivate it, and now the Movellans have sort of, I guess you could call it, evolved. They're robots, so they can't really, evolve. So, they've become, they crash landed on here, and one of them wakes up because of the power pack. They've evolved to have wireless power, and once the power pack is active, it sends a signal to get the Movellan back up and moving, which is really, really cool. So, Romana and this woman that she's with basically get caught on the Movellan spaceship. This dude she's gets caught on the Movellan spaceship. The dude dies. The dude dies and gets blown up by the spaceship, which is kind of again, it's things like this that are just fascinating. Like, very much it feels. But there's like this. There are multiple Movellans on the spaceship inactive. There's a Movellan weapon who's like this big, I guess, like this big, sort of like the Hulk if he was a Movellan, which is an interesting image, but played almost entirely seriously. So it sounds funny when you talk about it, but like the performance and the script actually does a bunch to sort of make you think, oh, this is weird, and halfway through the big cliff, that's really all this first episode does. It doesn't actually do a lot to try to build up the Movellans, as a threat. It doesn't but it does. It's basically, it lets you get in the mystery of like, how did this Movellan pack get to Earth? Like, there's some explanation that, through their war with the Daleks they got there, but then something crazy happened, like halfway through, and that is that, like, then you have the Movellans are alive. And Andrew Smith really sort of delves into sort of the calculating nature of the Movellans. As they allow people to die. They allow suffering to happen, just to further their own ends, which is an interesting way of doing a story like this, because it's this nice sort of almost look at the morality of a species like this, that they would let people die to further their goal of beating the Daleks, because that's what they're programmed to do. Their entire life and life force is their entire purpose is to try and beat the Daleks, basically before they kill anything else. And so it's sort of, you take it and it kind of helps that we actually take them out of the setting of with the Daleks, because the Daleks don't appear here. This isn't a surprise Dalek story. So you really just sort of have to have them Smith has to make them shine on their own, and he does an excellent job of that. Maybe he takes a little too long, but overall he does a good job of making you sort of understand what makes the Movellans tick, and really understand what they are. Overall, I'm going to give Doctor Who: The Movellan Grave Part 1 an 8 out of 10. It is the 29th of September 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 2 of The Movellan Grave. Part 2 of The Movellan Grave takes a different approach to Part 1, where Part 1 was sort of this slow mystery as to what the Movellans are doing. Here, Part 2 sort of takes a time to provide the answers, so to speak. It's a story where you really get this interesting little sense of character building, and just a lot of stuff built up around the characters having this story to themselves. The story builds on the idea of the Movellans as scientists trying to overcome their war with the Daleks. So they gave this one Movellan an experimental test subject, basically an emotion, and giving it emotions that sort of created just sort of the strength and sort of the Incredible Hulk-like Movellan character, which is an interesting way of doing a character. It's definitely an interesting way of writing a Movellan, because you have the Movellans being there to be the just sort of a different type. They're very much a different type of alien. They do a lot of different things, and they create basically an entirely different way of looking at the story, and they sort of a different morality here that Andrew Smith tries to explore. He mostly goes for the idea that the Movellans are, there's this idea that it's wrong for them to like this whole, it's this sort of like the story about like experimental test studying subjects like this are, wrong and shouldn't be done, and it's taking a stand against that with a thriller. Well, whilst the Movellans, I guess, try to get back for most of the story, the episode, to try to get back to the war with the Daleks, even though they've basically made a time jump. So in making the time jump, they can't go back. They're sort of lost in their purpose. They don't really have a quote unquote purpose for this. Basically they don't have a purpose in this world. They kind of just sort of have to try to live in a time period, and they can't get back. So it sort of ends up killing them. Like, they use prehistoric Earth as a testing site, and like this entire area was like a mass grave of just decommissioned and disposed Movellans, which is kind of an interesting image to put into your mind, and it's an image that sort of sticks in your mind. You get just this idea of Movellans, not your standard Doctor Who monster, all destroyed. Again, I said in part 1 that this was sort of like a redemption for the Movellans, and I still stand by that. It's not as successful as, say, the Vord in Domain of the Vord, but it's an interesting enough idea that there's a through line here, that there is something at least a little bit interesting to have the characters have fun with. Tom Baker and Lala Ward in particular seems to be having a lot of fun with the script, as she gets to play a lot of the humor, and Romana gets to kind of be the hero here, while the Doctor almost takes a back seat for a lot of the story's runtime. The Doctor staying sort of back, which it's an interesting take, is having the Doctor be in the back seat while Romana is basically playing up being a character in charge and having sort of the forward momentum for the story. Something that the story, I think, does a really good job with. It makes a lot of sense that, and Andrew Smith does a good job here. It's obvious that Andrew Smith likes the character of Romana, and that sort of adoration for a character really does shine through throughout the story. I will say there are a couple of issues, especially with this episode. I don't think the Movellans necessarily work the best without the Daleks there. I don't know if it's like definitely Andrew Smith tried, and I think trying to pose this morality question for a bunch of robots, even sentient robots, is a little ham-fisted, because the Movellans who were tested upon, it wasn't like some evil plan to test on them. It was completely like, we got their consent, and they would be, it's like, yes, and they would be disposed of in the proper way, in a proper, in a way that they agreed to. It's not necessarily like it's not making it out to be such this sort of moral question of like, this is just wrong, like that Andrew Smith almost tries to make it out to be. It's something a little more subtle than that, and a little more interesting, and it gets to just to a point of the episode with a little more built on the time. So overall, I'm going to give the Movellan Grave Part 2 a 7 out of 10, because it's good. It's just perhaps not as good as the first part was. That being said, we do add up the scores and average them out to give the Movellan Grave a final score of 7.5 out of 10. thank you everybody once again for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And join me next time when we actually go away from audio dramas for just one story. And we actually start season 18 of Doctor Who with the first story of season 18 and the first story to be produced by the final producer for Doctor Who, John Nathan Turner, with The Leisure Hive.